Jesus 911, we're here with the greatest expositor in the Catholic Church when it comes to the book of Genesis, in my opinion. I've been reading his articles for decades, and this man is absolutely mastered this topic.
So the reality is, suppose I have a rock in my hand right now, and in this rock, there's some uranium and some lead, and I know that uranium decays into lead through 8 steps over a certain period of time as measured in the laboratory today. Okay, so if I know how much lead is in this lump of rock, and I know how long it takes for uranium to decay into that amount of lead, and let's say that I know that it takes 1.2 billion years at the rate of uranium to lead decay that we measure today to produce the amount of lead in this rock, well, then it's a slam dunk, right? This rock must be 1.2 billion years old. That's what we're taught anyway. But that's the problem. We're given the conclusion, but we're not taught the assumptions that went into arriving at that conclusion. So here's the problem. There are actually 3 assumptions that go into determining that this rock is 1.2 billion years old, and all of them are completely unreasonable. Number 1, I have to assume that I know what the original conditions were. I'm assuming that when this material first formed, that there was no lead and only uranium. How could I know that? I can't get in a time machine and go back 1.2 billion years to examine this material. So that's the first problem. Number 2, I'm assuming that the rate of uranium to lead decay has been constant for 1.2 billion years. That is a very unreasonable assumption, because we know from experiments that the rates of decay can be altered by various factors like temperature and pressure. Number 3, I'm assuming that this material that has produced this rock has been in complete isolation from the environment for the entire history of the rock. That's completely insane. Uranium's water soluble. Am I supposed to believe that for the entire 1.2 billion years, water never brought uranium in, took uranium out, that it's somehow been preserved in some kind of isolation from the environment? That's not reasonable at all.
Nope.
So the reality is, this date of 1.2 billion years is not scientific at all. Now,
bogus.
That brings me, though, to a radiometric dating method that is much more reliable than most of the methods that are used, carbon-14. This is because in our atmosphere, cosmic rays are constantly coming in, and they collide, some of them, with nitrogen atoms and turn them into carbon atoms, carbon-14. Now, all living things, as we know, contain carbon. Plants breathe it in, and then animals and humans eat the plants. So every single one of us has a lot of carbon in our bodies. And for every trillion atoms of carbon-12, which is the stable form of carbon, we have 1 atom of carbon-14. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Because when a plant, animal, or human dies, all those carbon-14 atoms in our bodies, after we're dead, begin to turn back into nitrogen-14 at a very fast rate. So after 5,730 years, half of the carbon-14 atoms in the dead plant, animal, or human will have turned back into nitrogen-14. And after 50 to 100,000 years, there will not be one single atom of carbon-14 left in the remains of that plant, animal, or human. Now, we are told that the fossil record was formed over hundreds of millions of years, and that dinosaurs became extinct 65 million years ago. So how many atoms of carbon-14 should be left in the remains of the dinosaurs? Zero.
Nothing.
But our separated brethren and our scientists have collaborated very beautifully in collecting dinosaur bones from many different locations. Some of them we excavated ourselves. And we have sent those dinosaur bones to world-class laboratories that have a machine called an accelerated mass spectrometer that can count the number of carbon-14 and carbon-12 atoms in the sample. And we have found that every single one of those dinosaurs contained substantial amounts of carbon-14. These are the
That's real
remains
science.
of the dinosaurs. So
That's real science.
this shows that these dinosaurs did not become extinct 65 million years ago. They became extinct only thousands of years ago. And the most logical explanation is that most of the dinosaurs that we find in the dinosaur graveyards, for example, in places like Montana, were buried in the sediment flows of Noah's flood approximately 4,500 years ago. That is by far the best explanation, because you see, everything that has ever been tested in the entire fossil record that still has organic material in it has contained carbon-14, which means that everything was buried only thousands of years ago, not millions or hundreds of millions of years ago.
Jesse has a saying, and he says, sin makes you stupid. And essentially, that's what you have when you have a people who have rejected the goodness of God and the revelation of God, and they try to just look within themselves. Well, their conclusions end up being so far off the reservation.
We're talking to Hugh Owen. The book is called Love, Lost, and Found. You can get the book by going to the colbycenter.org, colbycenter.org.